These are my new tiny watercolor palettes. First impression of this recent discovery, they're ultra compact, clever wooden design, and absolutely irresistibly adorable. But is it too good to be true? In this video, I'll share why I chose to grab these, how I fill them with paint, and finally my impressions after traveling with them. There are plenty of watercolor palettes out there, so why these? You may be familiar with the good old tin palette and the half pans, and you've probably seen me fill this in one of the videos on my channel. Here's been my go-to palette with pigments for a few years now, and yeah, it's in need of a little bit of an upgrade. I also have my first ever solo adventure on the horizon, and I was definitely tempted to give a more compact design a try. Let's take a closer look. The first thing that got my attention was that they're made from wood, and also very clever little magnets on the side to clip together, making it really easy to open and close. They're also a cool shape, super aesthetic, which makes you want to use it more. The teeny little one holds 8 pigments, and the larger one holds 15. Pretty great for its size. Especially when traveling, you want to carry and try to carry as less as possible, which is not always easy because you want to make sure you have everything. When I first saw these, I thought it was so perfect to attach to a sketchbook, pretty much any size. So one thing I always think about is intention. As someone who really enjoys painting on location, taking my supplies on the go, and capturing the moment in my sketchbook, I'm constantly looking for supplies for a compact, lightweight option, especially when traveling by plane. It's not so bad when you can just throw your stuff in the car, but since I have a long flight across country, I figured I'd give these a go. Now the hardest part may be to actually choose which pigments and colors to take with you. And after some thinking, I decided to put some basics in the tiny palette. I'll go over the exact pigments in just a bit, but I figured I'd bring you guys along on the second palette and how I fill that one up as well. This time around, I wanted to try something different. I have colors that I naturally gravitate towards, but this time I wanted to include a bunch of new ones that I discovered. In a recent art haul video, I shared these new pigments and swatches that I made with these absolutely beautiful colors. I usually go for bright colors, but I wanted to create a little special palette with new colors to inspire me. The first thing I like to do is lay everything out, look at all of my swatches. I'll definitely need to take a day where I create swatches of every watercolor that I have. Let me know if you want to see that, because I just find that it's super important to get to know your pigments and just play around. And I've definitely realized it's quite therapeutic. So after some thinking and taking a closer look at all the swatches, the little one is the basic palette that I put together with some warm and cool tones of the primaries, and the second palette I'm going to include these beautiful granulating colors. Definitely check out this video if you want to see these in a closer look. The 8 pigments that I decided to go with for this little baby tiny palette, and this is definitely quite an experiment. I don't normally grab for buff titanium. This is my first time adding it to a palette. Instead of my usual bright lemon yellow, I went with a new gamboge. I've been loving orangey browns lately, so that's where the transparent brown oxide comes in. And I've never mixed pigments before, but I decided to mix 2 together, and you can look over on the right for the names of all the pigments. You can mix any with these, some beautiful shadow tones, and also get nice sketches in with them. Here are a few questions you can ask yourself before deciding what pigments to put in your palette. Whether you're traveling or going somewhere locally, think about the scenery you'll be around. Do you like to capture landscapes or more city vibes? Ask yourself what colors you usually gravitate towards, or maybe some you want to explore. It's usually really hard for me to decide, but this definitely helped when I asked myself. These pigments are actually way out of my comfort zone, which is exactly why I wanted to give them a try and experiment. I really like these 3 as a combo, so I placed them at the top of the palette, and these are mostly all different brands, so I was really paying attention on how they set in the palette, and I use a toothpick to get out any air bubbles and just make sure it's nice and even. These 3 are kind of in like a gray tone, and the reason why I chose these is because I like to do these for washes when I'm combining it with ink. So I have a warm gray, a neutral gray, and a cool gray, which will be the Davies gray. took a look at my larger palette and I noticed that I don't really grab certain reds that often, but I do love a good orangish brown, and one of my favorite reds is a quinacridone red, which is mostly like a pink, and when you mix it with yellow, it creates a beautiful orange. These are conclusions and observations you make as you try different pigments and see which ones you love. I love naphthalide maroon. I find that it mixes beautiful shadow tones, and this lavender quickly made its way to the favorites as well. I am overfilling the pans just slightly because when they dry, they kind of set into the wells and then they become actually smaller, so they shrink. My main tip when filling pans is to take your time, make sure you're interchanging the toothpicks so you're not contaminating it with other pigments, and enjoy the therapeutic, fun process of it. Now that our lovely palettes are all set up, let them dry completely and let's do some swatches. I cut some smaller pieces of watercolor paper that will fit right in the size. And while I swatch, a quick word from our sponsors, Squarespace. As a full-time artist, having a website is super crucial, especially nowadays. This all-in-one platform allows me to put my favorite links to my favorite supplies with all of the pigments that I love. With their award-winning templates, I'm able to set up the hidden links, that way you guys can find all of my favorite supplies, more about me, my portfolio, my shop, you name it. I love that I can manage both my shop and my portfolio right on Squarespace. And I also have a secret shop for my patrons where it's password protected, which is awesome. Definitely give it a try by going to squarespace.com for your free trial. And when you're ready to launch your site, go to squarespace.com/JessCarp for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Alright, all the swatches are done. Here's what our palette looks like. But now you may be wondering, what was it like using them? Well, let me show you. A week ago, I embarked my first solo adventure across country to Los Angeles, California. I was also invited to speak and demo at Lightbox Expo. I got to meet you guys, which was super awesome, and it was a dream come true. More to come on that soon, but I carried these two sketchbooks with me, one for drawing and one for painting. I decided to go back to using a moleskin after so many years. It was my first ever, but for painting, this is what I created with these palettes. I'm trying the hand mule paper for my watercolor sketchbook. And to break into the first page, I just spent all morning playing with the supplies and trying out these palettes. I've been painting and drawing for many years now, so I was able to gather my conclusions rather quickly. But a great tip, if you're stuck with the first page, just draw all your supplies and get to know them while you're at it. Making room for play and time to experiment is one of the best things you can do. Sometimes you just gotta get messy, colorful, and have fun. These three were super compact, so I actually decided to bring both. The green tin palette is actually a Neocolor Aqua Pastels, and since they're water soluble, I crushed them into the pans. But let me know if you want a video on that too. Now to quickly talk about my setup, I actually ended up putting these little magnets on the back so that when I have my easel, which I custom made with my dad. So many of you guys asked about this and it's coming shortly. But since there are magnets on both surfaces, it allows you to snap it right together and place it on top. That way you have your surface for your paint and your sketchbook sits right on top. I'm all about functionality and great workflow, and this worked quite excellently. I always like testing different setups, and this one I made in a cafe on a table. But then I also went right on location and painted the beautiful Hollywood sign, and I wanted to challenge myself with a panoramic landscape. If you've painted outside plein air before or on location, you know there's a juggle of a bunch of different things at once while you're doing it. But I have to say, since they're so compact and small, I definitely had to get used to the feeling since I wasn't used to it. I was also getting used to my deep blues and greens in the new palette, but it was quite interesting and I really like how it came out. Those are just a few I did on travels, but But I really wanted to try out different techniques and locations until I made my final conclusion on the pros and cons. A different topic here, but after filling out some ink drawings and gestures of people, also from life, rather making a full-blown painting, I found that this makes perfect option for washes and a great on-the-go palette to just throw in your bag and get to sketching. It even basically fits in your pocket. But now that I've done some painting and trying it out in different spaces, different topics, different techniques, and while I am a very optimistic person, is there a perfect palette? Let's talk about some pros and cons. These will all be based on my personal findings and opinions, but beginning with pros, I really love the fact that they're ultra compact. Naturally, teeny tiny things will appear super adorable, and there also definitely is an aesthetic to that. However, since it is smaller, you're gonna lose a little bit of space, which we'll talk about in the cons section. As far as something for washes and just getting in a nice quick value in, these palettes are great for that. I've also found that for their size, to hold 8 pigments in the small one and 15 for the larger one is pretty impressive. Going back to the design, the magnets are great. I actually personally like them a lot, but I perhaps worry about it becoming an issue later where it won't clip properly, or maybe it'll get flimsy or weaker, but since there's an indent to clip on a sketchbook, I'm not too worried about it. Now let's talk about some cons. While I was painting for longer periods of time, I found that it got a bit messy, especially when using larger brushes. Depending on your style of painting, I found that the pigments would kind of mix into one another, and the distance in between the wells are pretty close together. That's a minor detail and a personal observation. The wells are also not so deep, and some of the paint will go out on the edges, which could be a pro or a con depending on you. Since it is smaller, you're also limited to the mixing area. But hey, you kind of have to make exceptions if you're going for the ultra compact option. I actually love the combo of using a water brush and a monochromatic color scheme, and the smaller well actually allowed you to mix a nice consistency, and it lasted throughout the whole painting. Now, since the wells are so tiny and small, paint may run out much quicker since there's not that much inside. Here's what my paints look like after about 2 full paintings. Plenty of pigment, but it did decrease significantly in the middle. The watercolors do last for a really long time, and you can still get so much use out of that, but it's not going to be as much as when you're filling out these pans and putting it in the tin palettes. As you can see, the difference is quite significant. So depending on whether you're going to be taking these on location, you have to understand that you'll also be stuck with these colors because they're not interchangeable, and you kind of have to use them up or wash it out completely to get different ones in case you change your mind. Unlike the tin palettes, you can take out these little half pans, and if you want to move them around or change them, everything is sort of customizable, but you are dealing with a larger palette. So I guess it does come down to personal preference and being sure on the colors you choose. I've also found that it needs to be maintained and cleaned, and that does come down to every palette. However, this one more so because of the fact that it does get a little messy throughout the process. But hey, that can actually be a good thing. The reason why I bring it up is to be mindful when you actually close the palette, because if it comes out on the edges, it could affect the way that the magnets clip together, which is a fair point. And lastly, I found that these palettes limit you in general, but sometimes when we put limits for ourselves in terms of art and constraint, this is a great thing. So I'm actually going to put this into the pros section as well. It forces you to be intentional with all that you do. And in my opinion, intention is everything. Well, and there you have it. These are some of the conclusions and observations that I've made for now. Overall, these are super fun, and I find them great for on-the-go sketching and great for travel as well. I would definitely get more, I think, to get different color palettes going and try out some even more new colors. I'll keep you guys updated on my Instagram on how I feel about this over time, so be sure to follow me on there. I wanted to make this video in case it could help you, and if there's anything that I missed, some tips or tricks, feel free to leave them in the comments below and let's all share each other's knowledge. Lots of fun videos coming up from California, which was a magical dream experience. Definitely subscribe down below if you're not yet subscribed. Here's one more look at all of the swatches and the colors up close. These greens were really excellent for nature, and this beautiful dusk yellow granulates so beautifully. Let me know if you want to have an updated full version of all my travel supplies lately, and be sure to check out the video on the screen to see how I set up my previous palettes and some more tips and tricks on that. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for your support. Till next time, I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.